Hello, in this video I want to explain why Pax Tube ultimately does not offer us an objective view of European slavery. He simply refuses to stillman the arguments against European colonialism, and he presents them at their silliest, and I want to offer a objective perspective on this issue. So okay, let us start.
Colonization is a topic that has several contentious issues surrounding it. These things shouldn't be ignored, but addressed directly. First, let's look at the issue of slavery. A common narrative that's circulated today is what I like to call the uniquely evil whites slavery narrative. It essentially states that Europeans are uniquely evil for slavery, and thus should be punished in the modern world for their supposed crimes. In the following section, I will dismantle that narrative. Let's start with some basic, undisputed facts. Slavery is something that's been practiced through all of human history, in all lands, at all times, in one form or another. The ancient Greeks had slavery. The ancient Chinese had slavery. The Islamic world had slavery. Ancient Israel and the Jews had slavery. Africans engaged in slavery. The man you see on the screen was named Tipu Tip. He was a Zanzibar merchant who owned over 10,000 slaves. Odd how people like him aren't talked about more. In fact, slavery still exists in many parts of the world today. The point here is that slavery did not magically appear in the 1500s. European Christendom had actually abolished slavery of other Christians during the Middle Ages. The tendency
Okay, I just want to quickly intervene. It is true that for a while the church and kings that felt pressured from the church did abolish slavery in the medieval period, but why did they do it? Because serfdom existed, and while serfdom is generally speaking better than slavery, it is very similar. In practice, the feudal lords could torture the peasants, impale them on spikes for no good reason, rape them, and nothing would happen to them. So yeah, it's not like slavery was replaced by liberalism. It was replaced by serfdom, which is also pretty bad. And well, what's also kind of funny in a dark way, as soon as the European economies started to need slavery again, it was just reintroduced with the massive project of colonization. But okay, let us continue.
to blame slavery on the so-called white man is an outrageous rewriting of history. Giving proper context to slavery shows that, outside of the racial aspect, its practice in the New World wasn't really special. Slavery in the New World was also not something that only European Christians participated in. Jews, Native Americans, and free blacks were enthusiastic participants. Even Jewish sources like the Israeli-run newspaper Haaretz note that Southern Jews owned slaves in comparable numbers to their white, non-Jewish neighbors. But hold on, I'm not even close to done. The slave trade in the Americas would never have been possible without the slave trade that already existed in Africa. African kingdoms sold their slaves to colonial companies, who then transported them to the New World. This is all worth pointing out not to moralize about slavery, but to show that it was a multi-layered issue. The point here is not to villainize anyone. It's to point out how the way that some people today talk endlessly about slavery and treat it as a white-only endeavor is deeply deceptive. They know the true reality, that all groups were involved, but they suppress this in order to advance their own political agenda. During colonization, slavery also wasn't universally practiced. There were, from the beginning, many different rulers and religious leaders who forbade it. Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, forbade his subjects from enslaving or robbing native peoples in mission lands. In 15
Quick intervention. Why did he forbid the colonizers from having the Indian slaves? Because he realized that Indians are more likely to die from disease and that they're ineffective at slavery. That's why he decided to use black people from Africa. So, in a way, it was a moral thing to do. He genuinely wanted to then prevent unnecessary dying, but his main point was that Indians are simply not effective as slaves. That needs to be said. Okay, let's continue.
1537, Pope Paul III issued a document known as Sublimis Deus, where he announced that abuse of Native Americans would carry the penalty of excommunication. We therefore are vigilant that these Indians, even if outside the bosom of the Church, are not deprived, nor are they to be deprived, of their freedom or the ownership of their goods, for they are men, and therefore capable of faith and salvation, and thus they are not to be destroyed by enslavement, but rather invited to life through preaching and example. This papal edict was followed by Charles V's new laws in 1542, which freed all indigenous slaves in Spanish America. Of course, laws and edicts against enslaving natives were not always followed by colonists. In some cases, when attempts to ease slavery were made, there were even revolts by landowners to keep their slaves. Slavery has always been driven by the human condition, pursuit of money and power. The slave trade would vastly expand in the 1600s as cash crops became more lucrative, and Africans were seen as the best workers to harvest them in the tropical climate. People accepted African.
What I want to add is, if I had to make the argument that European colonization was somehow worse from, let's say, Muslim slave trade, ultimately I don't think I buy this argument, but at least I want to steelman the argument for those that make it. The argument is that European slavery in the 19th century becomes uniquely evil because of scientific racism. Scientific racism is this doctrine that claims that white Europeans are superior to all other kinds of humans. Now, what is uniquely evil about this ideology? Well, I personally think that you are equally evil if you discriminate people for their religion, which is what the Muslim empires did. But if I had to make an argument that racism is worse than religious discrimination, I would say that in the world created by colonialism, now I'm talking about the 19th century and the 20th century, there were entire generations of people raised in the colonies that grew up believing they're inferior to white people because they were taught in school that as a fact. And it wasn't until the Japanese Empire, as horrible as it were in World War II, actually managed to win many battles against the British Empire, even when the Japanese were outnumbered. And after that event, the people in the colonies actually started to question this idea that they are inferior, because then how the hell did the Japanese win against like much larger British armies? And also Ho Chi Minh, for example, was inspired by Lenin, who claimed that the communist revolution in the colonies will then trigger the white Europeans to do their own communist revolutions. But okay, let us continue. Okay, in this segment of the video, Pax Tube answers the question: did the Native American genocide happen? Okay, let's find out.
The reality is that mass death did occur among the natives in the Americas, but these were from diseases that Europeans had no control over. People's understanding of disease in the colonial era was extremely limited. Neither the colonizers nor the natives properly understood how to keep themselves and others from catching diseases. Germ theory didn't exist until the mid-1800s, hundreds of years after colonization took place. To lay the death of every native on colonizers is absurd. For comparison, the Mongol Empire brought the Black Death to Europe, and yet no one blames Asians collectively as responsible for the deaths caused by that plague, nor should they. But while objections over slavery and genocide at least have some basis in reality, there's also anti-colonial propaganda that has zero truth to it whatsoever.
Okay, I just want to add something. Yes, to say that those that died from the disease died as a result of genocide is untrue. But there are many other methods that could be described as genocide. For example, the reason why President Grant, the US president, went against his own Congress that tried to ban buffalo hunting. Why did he want the Europeans to continue to hunt buffalo? Because he realized that buffaloes are the main food source for the Indians during the winter. So that was deliberate starvation. Now, if deliberate starvation isn't the genocide, then I don't know. I mean, maybe you can make the case that it is just a horrible massacre, not a genocide. But okay, then we can focus on many mini genocides that happened. For example, Indian Removal Act, done by Andrew Jackson. That was surely a genocide. So, in my opinion, he's trying to conflate every single objection and present it as this idea that Europeans deliberately spread the disease, which for the most part they didn't do. But we do know that sometimes the Europeans used to use the blankets that were previously used by sick people, for example, people that had smallpox, and trade them to the Indians. And they knew that probably they are going to get sick from it. They didn't expect like half of them to die. But yes, you don't have to understand germ theory in order to know that if a sick person has something like in their mouth or on them, that it might spread the disease further. Okay, but let us go.
In 2023, California removed a statue of the Catholic saint and Jesuit Junipero Serra. His supposed crimes include accusations of slavery, abuse of natives, and women. California made him the scapegoat of all the ills of colonization. But in reality, Saint Serra could rightfully be called the father of California.
Okay, one area where I actually do agree with Pax Tube. I'm not sure how far would he go with this principle, but I do think that it is silly to remove the statues of people that were as evil as an average person back then. For example, removing the Churchill statues. Well, it really makes no sense, because was he racist? Yes, but was he more racist than an average person in Britain back then? Well, no. And did he make some like horrible decisions like the Bengal famine and stuff like that? Well, yes, but then we are limiting ourselves to a very small percentage of people that did absolutely nothing wrong. Like Gandhi had this creepy custom of sleeping with underage girls, like literally sleeping, not having sex with them. He just slept with them in the same bed. I don't know, he was a weird guy. So my point is, you can then by the same principle cancel many other people. Like you can to bring this principle to its absurdity, you can say, well, Jesus was pro-slavery, so were pretty much all other prophets, whether we are talking about Muhammad or, well, I don't know even what Buddha said about it, but he wasn't explicitly against it. So yes, my point is, it actually, in my humble opinion, it makes no sense really to cancel people that were just as evil as everybody else, while, for example, Hitler was much worse, because no other state attempted to wipe out so many people. Just try and guess how many prisoners of war Nazi Germany killed on the Eastern Front in 1941. Just 1 year, half a year actually. 2 million Soviets in half a year. And I'm talking just about prisoners of war. If we look at civilians overall, it is much worse. So that's why it makes sense to remove Hitler statues, for example. But yeah, on this subject, well, the best argument, if I had to make it, for removing the statues is that the majority of the people want it. If it is true that the majority of the people want it, then I would say, well, that's democracy. Like we simply have to do what the people demand. But okay, let us continue. And as the last big question, let us explore all the positive things that happened as a result of colonialism. Okay, let us.
One of the most obvious positives of colonization was the positive mark the colonial pioneers left on history. Exploration of the globe has had benefits for mankind that are hard to calculate. The creation of sea trade routes across the world led to a major increase in the global standard of living. The early explorers and colonizers showed that the world could be changed through intelligence, determination, and downright zeal. They braved the seas, tamed the forests, and left us many countries that we now have the luxury of living in. Another obvious positive of colonization was the spread of technologies that significantly improved the lives of millions of people. I'll quickly name some of these technologies. Steel, horses, cattle, plows, seafaring ships, firearms, and crossbows. In some parts of the Americas, the colonists introduced monogamy. They also brought sugarcane, wheat, iron tools and kitchenware, clocks, print, carts, and carriages. I could go on. They even brought viticulture, that is, grape growing. Every vineyard in the Americas should have a statue of a missionary like Junipero Serra, who contributed their lives to bringing these advances here. The spread of European civilization and Christianity to the Americas also brought new, effective forms of government to the continent. It ended extremely brutal and endless warfare that had been going on between tribes for centuries, if not millennia. We know that colonial administration was effective because revolts against it were very rare. Professor Anthony McFarlane of the University of Warwick wrote, "Until the final half-century of Spanish rule."
Okay. What I just want to say about this topic, it is possible for an event to be horrible and still have many good outcomes. For example, let's look at World War II. World War II, most historians agree, led to the end of colonialism because the British and French economies were severely damaged because it made communism stronger in the end, World War II, and all communist societies were anti-colonial. I'm not denying that they, in their own way, were imperialist, but they did help every single anti-colonial movement on earth, both the Soviet Union and China. And finally, World War II led to gender equality in a liberal sense. Just, I'm not talking about, I don't know, some crazy notion of it. I'm just talking about the equality established in the post-war era with women getting the right to vote, for example, in France and many other countries. So yes, it is possible for an event to be horrible and at the same time to have many positive outcomes. And I do agree with that without colonialism, the world wouldn't be as connected and as globalized as it is, and we would have less scientific knowledge as well. But that doesn't mean that we are now obligated to justify every single bad thing that happened as a result of colonialism. For example, here is an example. Would the Europeans have access to Aristotle without Muslim imperialism in the Middle East and in Spain? Probably not, or not as fast. They would, for the first time, read Aristotle probably centuries later without Muslim imperialism. But does that make Muslim imperialism okay? Well, no, especially not today. And yes, well, my main point is what also Pax Tube, let's say, forgot to mention. Let's be generous and say forgot to mention is that at one point surely colonialism became evil. It is silly to say that in the 19th century it was extremely evil because everybody was trying to conquer everybody. But after World War II, maybe even after World War One, it depends where you draw the line. I would personally draw it after World War II. Colonialism became extremely evil. Why is that? Because at that point, most people in the world start to see it as evil. Communists saw it as evil because they saw all capitalist imperialism as evil. Even the United States condemned European colonialism as unacceptable in an attempt to kind of show to the world, hey, the Soviets aren't the only ones condemning colonialism, which then led to, for example, the United States condemning both the French, the British, and Israel in the war for the Suez Canal. But okay, yeah, that's my point. At one point, colonialism surely became evil, and I don't think that Pax Tube here shares my attitude. Let's see. Okay, that's all for this video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this.